of the system, the GAC, the activated carbon. So it's going to be some time before we actually are up and running full-fledged. It's not there yet.
Are we not still short some components?
Yeah.
We can't really.
I know they was talking about it in the paper, getting it up and going, and this, it's never said what they've had running, what they haven't had running.
Right. The article is probably a bit premature, really, in looking back at it, because they are still in the process of working with the system.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Mrs. Crutch.
I've had a few lawnscape contractors that are interested in trying to use the compost site. And I know it's only for city and city residents, but I looked into Napoleon's compost site, and they have a $60 a year pass for people that are non-residents that could use their yard waste site, and a $200 a year for contractors. You know, when I think of the landscape companies that are around and they're taking clippings, I'm not sure where they're taking those things because they can't use our compost site. So I don't know if that's something we could look at for a memorandum or something that we could put into the compost site that they would have to pay. It would be a moneymaker for us. I just didn't know if it was too much that our compost site could not handle it.
Well, I'll give you an opinion on that. I mean, at this point, what we do with the brush and anybody that's used that compost site will understand that we do like 2 grindings a year, but that fills up rather fast with brush, leaves, and what happens when you bring contractors in, that $60 charge that you talk about, it's pretty cheap to get rid of those clippings, because if we would allow that, you're going to find that the grindings are probably going to double, if not more than double, out at that site. And, you know, we've had a company come in and actually take it for free. They're not going to take it for free anymore because it's just getting too expensive to deal with. But the brush and the leaves and the grass is something that more and more we're finding, even when residents use it, that we're finding that it gets so much activity out there that it's creating quite a issue with us and the grindings each and every year. If we allow contractors to come in and actually, you know, because you're really not restricting how many times they can come in at that point. But we're going to find that our grindings are going to go up, which is very costly. Actually, it's probably $4,000 to $5,000 every time that somebody comes in and actually grinds down the brush and removes the grass.
Like Napoleon has, it's $200 for contractors to use their yard waste. $60 was for like people that were outside the city limits. You know, I could see not letting people outside the city. Where are they putting their grass clippings and stuff? Are they dumping it that it's going to go into our rivers, or, you know, I don't know where they put it. You know, I think of back in the day, I lived along the river and we used to rake it down the riverbank, which was not good. But, you know, I don't want those things that we're trying to propose cleaning up our rivers, and we're going to have this issue. So
Jen English probably just had a stroke.
I know. I'm sure she did. You know, of course, most of it was.
Let us discuss it again, but what you're saying, Mrs. Crutch, I mean, if you do the math, if it's $5,000, as Mr. Leonard said, and we charge $200 a crack, we've got to find 25 contractors that are going to want to dump there to break even.
Mm-hmm.
And whether or not we can do that, I don't know.
Right.
There's a fair amount of lawn contractors, but I don't know whether we have that
Right,
many.
there's quite a few
Let us
out
talk
there.
about it, revisit the issue.
You know, and I know it's free for the city residents. Maybe we should charge something too, if that would help with the cost of getting it ground up and removed.
Charging an issue,
I,
you want to address that, or you just want me to wing it?
The liability.
I'm going to scare you.
Yeah.
Credit cards are a problem. We have
okay.
trouble with credit cards
Debit
because there's a
cards.
fee. And cash, dealing with cash, obviously, is an issue as
Right.
well. So that's the reason.
That's the issue. Okay. Thank you.
How'd I do?
Very well.
All right, thank you.
Any other comments from council? There's one issue on my desk. Just a reminder that all Class C and D alcohol permits expire on June 1st. So renewal applications need to be sent into Columbus as soon as possible. You don't want to go past the due date and have those expire on you. But that's all that I have. Mayor McCann.
Thank you, Mr. President. I guess I'll just talk about today. We had a good day. 8 o'clock this morning, we were out at Erica Willitzer's office meeting with the folks from TKI to Senda Curley, as well as Pioneer Rail, talking about, first of all, greeting TKI, one of the newer companies to our community that's locating out in Enterprise Industrial Park. And we hammered through a lot of things, still a lot, not so much for us to hammer through. They've got to get their engineering work done. We saw a very preliminary site plan, but it's moving along. But all the folks from TKI were here. They must have had 15 folks. Railroad had 10. We had great meetings up until about 10:30, at which point we adjourned there, took the railroad folks out to the Harmon Business Park and met with A Packaging, who I believe you've all been following what's going on out there. They still hope to be up and running in a big way mid-year, and they're looking to be rail served by later this year. So some pretty tight timelines. But let me just say that Pioneer Rail has been spectacular to deal with. And big days like today, Alex Yaros, their CEO, flies in here and just lays down the law for everything as far as getting stuff done. So impressive there. And then just now, well, we met with back to TKI this afternoon in this room on local issues that they need to work through, stormwater management and that sort of thing. Another good meeting. Then a reception that was put on by Pioneer Rail over at the old Rod Brown studio. And they did a great job in there with the reception that was catered. And we had a very enjoyable meal and some nice talk and hugs and handshakes and all that. But there's going to come a day where I'm going to wish I'd kept a journal, because today was one of those days where you'd like to reflect back and look at all the good things, including getting your bump fixed, that happened here in the city of Defiance. And that's really all I have.
Oh, well, thanks for the good news.
Yep.
Mr. Leonard.
Every day is a good day at City Hall, so that's all I'll say.
Mr. Mack.
I second that.
All right. Mr. O'Donnell.
It's all rainbows and unicorns here as well.
That's good news. Mr. Leonard.
Leave it to me to be the bearer of bad news. No, I wanted to update City Council on where we are with the West High Street repaving and waterline project. We are in numerous ways, but maybe in a big way, being impacted by inflation and supply shortages and things like that. So on March 15th, we did scheduled bid opening for the project. We had budgeted $1,025,000. The engineer's estimate for that bid packet was $1.1 million, and we had no responses, no bids. We had a couple of contractors who had indicated to Melinda Sproul that there was no way they could meet the 10% threshold that you're allowed to exceed the estimate by, and they just weren't going to put forth bids. So we're going out to rebid it with a modified engineer's estimate of 1.3 million to see what comes from the contractors and how close they come to that number. And then, we'll make the determination, we'll all make the determination whether the project goes forward or not at a higher price. I suspect it's gonna go forward. We have grant money involved. It's an important project. Everybody wants to get it done. I'm not really suggesting that we won't, but heads up that the number is gonna be higher than we budgeted. And that opening is on April 5th, so we should know here in another week and a half or so. And that's all.
Do we have any questions for Mr. Leonard?
Well, thank you.
As you all should know, I'm only saying this for my own information, I guess. Everybody knows asphalt prices are driven by oil prices, and that's what's happening.
Well, so's PVC pipe.
Yeah,
I know one contractor said, we get new prices every 7 days. So how do you bid something today for a project that won't start for how many weeks? Is it gonna be higher or lower?
Question, how does that affect the other street pavement jobs? Will we take one off and move around? I mean,
well, we have an ordinance on this evening to award the contract for resurfacing for this year. And we had budgeted $500,000 for that, and the bids came in, I believe, at $520,000. That is within the 10%, and we're awarding it to, I believe, Gherkin.
No, it's Ward
It is Ward,
Construction Company.
yep, it's in the ordinance tonight. And we can go over the list of those streets when that time comes. Yeah, Ward.
bad, Jill.
And that is a great segue. We do have 4 items of legislation for discussion this evening. Ms. Alders, would you read the caption for the first?
Nap time.
Yep. Second reading by caption only. An ordinance creating a Defiance Downtown Redevelopment District 1, Defiance Downtown Redevelopment District 2, Defiance Downtown Redevelopment District 3, future Defiance Downtown Redevelopment District 4, Defiance Downtown Redevelopment District 5, Defiance Downtown Redevelopment District 6, Defiance Downtown Redevelopment District 7, Defiance Downtown Redevelopment District 8, Defiance Downtown Redevelopment District 9, Defiance Downtown Redevelopment District 10, and Defiance Downtown Redevelopment District 11, declaring the improvements to certain parcels of real property to be a public purpose, exempting 70% of the value of such improvements from real property taxation for a period of 10 years, requiring that the owner of the parcels to make service payments in lieu of taxes, specifying the plan for using service payments to promote economic development and job creation, authorizing the execution of an economic development plan, establishing Defiance Downtown Redevelopment District 1 Fund, Defiance Downtown Redevelopment District 2 Fund, Defiance Downtown Redevelopment District 3 Fund, future Defiance Downtown Redevelopment District 4 Fund, Defiance Downtown Redevelopment District 5 Fund, Defiance Downtown Redevelopment District 6 Fund, Defiance Downtown Redevelopment District 7 Fund, Defiance Downtown Redevelopment District 8 Fund, Defiance Downtown Redevelopment District 9 Fund, Defiance Downtown Redevelopment District 10 Fund, and Defiance Downtown Redevelopment District 11 Fund for the deposit of such service payments and improving related matters.
Mr. O'Donnell.
Really have to go through readings?
It will, and I just want to note, Mr. President, that we debated including the last clause and approving related matters, but we decided to keep it in there instead of spelling it out because we wanted to keep it short and concise for our council clerk to read.
Thank you.
So this is the ordinance that would convert the 10 acres downtown and then the 10 areas downtown and the one area along Ottawa Avenue into what's called a downtown redevelopment district. Again, it operates much like a TIF, and that the property owners make service payments in lieu of taxes on 70% of the increased value of their property taxes. That new growth in collections would go into a fund to redevelop the buildings in that particular area. And part of the reason we have to have the 3 readings is because this body held a public hearing on March 1. And the statute 5709.45D states that we have to go 30 days from the day of that public hearing before adoption. So it will have to come back the next meeting on April 5th. That will exceed the required 30 days. So we recommend that you refrain from suspending the rules and calling a question on this matter, and would ask that you let consideration of the matter lie until the next meeting.
Thank you. Do we have any questions, Mr. Corbett?
Motion to let lie, sir.
We have a motion to let lie.
Second.
Second. All those in favor of letting this issue lie till next time, say aye.
Aye.
Oh, Mr. Rusty?
I did have a question,
Oh, sure.
but that's okay. Oh,
Well, we can,
I'm just kidding.
oh, okay.
Question I had is like if this, the downtown redevelopment district is approved, which I'm pretty sure it will be. We have a strategic plan in our community. Will this be a part of that, or will this be the centerpiece in the strategic plan on the side along with this? Because it involves a lot of the same groups that the strategic plan is also dealing with.
I would say this will roll more in, certainly, yes, the strategic plan group will talk about this, but I believe this will roll more into our comprehensive plan that we're just getting started on, part of that planning and zoning code yet, so,
It'll basically be pulling in everything else into this
Absolutely.
plan.
yep.
Okay, I like it, and I guess that's what I wanted to hear, because, you know, in reading the 72 pages, it pretty much gives you the idea of how it takes place. And I like when it mentions all the different groups that are involved. But I guess I look at it that, under the strategic plan, we're kind of like spread out, because we're trying to deal with an entire city together. This is pretty much taking it all in and dealing with it, as, like you said, a comprehensive plan, and then including many parts to it, which, I guess it's managed, I would probably say be managed a little better.
And I think you can gauge the level of interest by the community as the crowd we had the night that we had the public hearing to talk about it. All those folks that were sitting out here, that told me at least that we're on track with this one.
Do we have any other questions? If there are no other questions, we had a motion to let lie, seconded by Mr. Mast. If we have no other questions, all those in favor of letting this issue lie, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Then we will let this lie for now. It will come back for its third reading at our next city council meeting, which is scheduled for April 5th.
First reading by caption only, an ordinance authorizing a contract for the 2022 street resurfacing program and declaring an emergency.
Mr. O'Donnell.
Thank you, Mr. President. And as we discussed earlier, Mrs. Crutch, it is Ward Construction Company out of Lipsick, Ohio, that submitted the lowest and best bid, $520,977. The streets slated for this year's resurfacing project are Maywin, Johnson Circle, Kettering Drive, Prospect Street, and Seneca Street. And you may note that both the list and of streets and the amount is a little bit smaller than what you're probably accustomed to approving. And that's partially due to some good planning, but also there's other projects that you decided to budget for. If you recall, in the budget session, you had the East Commerce Drive construction project. We talked about the West High Street resurfacing, and then the South Clinton Street sidewalk project. And those would all be bid and contracted separately from this particular bill. So this is a little bit, I'm not gonna say pared back, but it just takes part of what the city's hoping to accomplish this year. And really, I mean, we request the emergency in part because of the statutory requirement to award the contract within 60 days of a successful bid. I will caution you for this one and the next two items of legislation and in the near future, anytime we're doing a public improvement or making a large purchase. I know we've got Chief Wilkins here about the squad vehicle. We're gonna be requesting emergency precisely because of the climate we're in, the inflationary climate we're in. If we don't bite on the bid, sometimes within the next day of council approving something, the vendor's likely to say, I can't fulfill this contract.
Thank you. Do we have any questions for Mr. O'Donnell? Mr. Waxler?
No further questions, most suspended, so.
We have a motion to suspend and call.
Second.
Second, Mr. Engel.
Mr. Corbett?
Yes.
Mr. Hancock?
Yes.
Mr. Rusty?
Yes.
Mr. Mast?
Yes.
Mr. Waxler?
Yes.
Mrs. Crutch?
Yes.
Mr. Engel?
Yes.
Motion to adopt?
Motion to adopt, Mrs. Crutch.
Second.
Second, Mr. Mast.
Mr. Hancock?
Yes.
Mr. Rusty?
Yes.
Mr. Mast?
Yes.
Mr. Wexler?
Yes.
Mrs. Crutch?
Yes.
Mr. Engel?
Yes.
And Mr. Corbett?
Yes.
This ordinance is adopted.
First reading by caption only, an ordinance authorizing a contract to provide emergency medical service to Highland Township and declare an emergency.
Mr. O'Donnell.
As I mentioned, Mr. President, our fire chief, Chief Wilkins, is here to answer any of your specific questions about this negotiated proposed contract. He did most of the negotiating. The Highland Township trustees approved an arrangement in this form a few weeks ago. And the proposed contract would be would have the city providing one paramedic, one licensed and trained paramedic to emergency medical calls in Highland Township. And that in return, and that benefits the city because we'd be sending one individual instead of a whole squad and having to backfill the station. But in return, the city would get $10,000 that would cover the first 50 emergency medical calls. And then for any call that exceeds 50, the first 50 calls, the city would receive $250 per call. The agreement that we have before you tonight is strictly to ensure that the township has a properly licensed paramedic at its calls. And we would submit to you that the city has the manpower to provide this service for a fee and can maintain adequate staffing levels. So, Chief, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Any questions in particular?
Mr. Rusty.
Is this the first time we've ever had this type of an agreement?
We currently have, with Highland Township, yes, we have an agreement with Noble Township, Defiance Township, to provide them EMS service under a contract. This contract is from 7 in the morning till 4 in the afternoon. And as we've talked many times, throughout the county and throughout the country, we're experiencing personnel issues. These are their key hours, and the calls aren't going to be all the time. The calls are only going to be if they don't get enough personnel to answer the call. We're going to respond initially on that call. And the calls are specific. They're ALS calls in that aspect. They're not going to be to assist an invalid for fall, things like that. It's an ALS run with a paramedic to get somebody at that scene to begin medical care until another unit can arrive on the scene. And in the contract, we've built into it a 5-minute time frame for a response for a backup squad. If they can't put a squad out within 5 minutes, then we're gonna back up that squad, and then things will change.
That was gonna be my question. So if they don't respond, and we have to send a squad and 2 more personnel, so we got 3, is there more additional costs, or is that still in the?
Then we will charge for the run collection.
Just like you normally would.
Just like we normally
Okay.
would, because if we don't do this, we're still gonna go.
Right.
If they make a request to us for assistance, we're still gonna respond.
Right, okay.
In this case, we're gonna get somebody out the door right at the very beginning of the run, rather than wait to go through a tone-out process.
Any other questions for Mr. O'Donnell or Chief Wilkins? Mr. Rust,
No other question, we'll suspend and call.
motion to suspend and call Mr. Rusty. Second, Mr. Engel.
Mr. Rusty?
Yes.
Mr. Math?
Yes.
Mr. Wexler?
Yes.
Mrs. Crutch?
Yes.
Mr. Engel?
Yes.
Mr. Corbett?
Yes.
Mr. Hancock?
Yes. Motion to adopt.
Motion to adopt, Mr. Mast. Second, Mr. Wexler.
Mr. Math?
Yes.
Mr. Wexler?
Yes.
Mrs. Crutch?
Yes.
Mr. Engel?
Yes.
Mr. Corbett?
Yes.
Mr. Hancock?
Yes.
And Mr. Rusty?
Yes.
This ordinance is adopted. And lastly,
First reading by caption only, an ordinance authorizing the purchase of a replacement squad ambulance and declaring emergency.
Mr. Leonard.
Yes, thank you. I believe it was back in January, council had approved an ordinance authorizing the purchase of a replacement squad. We went through, that unit was gonna be a Braun. It was to be purchased through, I believe, a different vendor. We had a quote, the chief and the fire department had worked on, that ordinance was for just under $269,000. We had all the paperwork in place, we had gone through the process of getting the financing all set. And the vendor, informed our fire department that they could not honor the price they had quoted us on. And, I think it went up, they were projecting maybe about $20,000 more. So they were taking it from 269,000 to, close to 290,000. And again, I don't wanna speak for Chief Wilkins, he is here. But they, were not happy about that, pretty much rejected that offer and, started shopping again. I think they went back to the state bid, or the state contract with another vendor, which is, the Horton unit, which is in this ordinance. And, at a quoted price, actually less than the original brawn that we had talked about, so $259,305. It'd be virtually the same terms we were talking about before. We'd be looking to finance this over 5 years. I think it also comes with about an 18-month lead before we'll get the vehicle. We won't have our first payment until 2023, so it'll be built into the 2023 budget. And that's all I've got, unless there are any questions for me or Chief Wilkins.
Mr. Waxler?
What's the difference in the two trucks, chief, as far as, that they were done that much cheaper? I'm just curious where that.
In that aspect, there's some things that we added into this because you could under the Horton, like height, we added 4 inches in height for headroom inside. With the other vendor, you couldn't do that, but the other vendor's box was more money. In that aspect, we added, the interior has some of the extra fan for air purification from the COVID. We added that in. If you look, there's a cost there of $7,400 roughly for items. And we added some of those items in due to the COVID. There's some extra lights that were put inside to, again, purify the inside of it. So that was kind of a change between the Horton and the others. There's a little bit, Bronze are notoriously a little more expensive, but their box is built a little different than what the Hortons are. But we have a Horton and we currently have a Braun also. The part that changed very quickly was we were within, I think, about a week of actually signing the contract because we had to wait the 30 days because of non-emergency. And that's when the vendor called and said they wouldn't honor it anymore.
That's what I was thinking. We had the Horton. We had a Horton already,
We have a
correct?
Horton
Yeah, that's what I
and
thought.
a Braun, yes.
That was my question.
Do we have any other questions? Mr. Engel?
No other questions, motion to suspend the call.
Motion to suspend and call. Second, Mr. Corbett?
Mr. Waxler?
Yes.
Mrs. Crutch?
Yes.
Mr. Engel?
Yes.
Mr. Corbett?
Yes.
Mr. Hancock?
Yes.
Mr. Rusty?
Yes.
And Mr. Mass?
Yes. Motion to adopt.
Motion to adopt, Mr. Hancock.
Second.
Second, Mr. Mast.
Mrs. Crutch?
Yes.
Mr. Engel?
Yes.
Mr. Corbett?
Yes.
Mr. Hancock?
Yes.
Mr. Rusty?
Yes.
Mr. Mass?
Yes.
And Mr. Waxler?
Yes.
This ordinance is adopted. Before we adjourn for this evening, did any members of council receive emails, phone calls, anything that citizens wanted you to bring up during citizens' concerns? If not, do we have a motion to adjourn for this evening?
So moved.
So moved. Second, Mr. Mast. All those in favor of adjourning this evening, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? All right, we are adjourned for this evening. In 2 weeks, we meet again, April 5th.